The morning sun cast long shadows across the academy training grounds as Sarah Chun adjusted her worn combat uniform. Around her, alien cadets from across the galaxy prepared their gleaming weapons and advanced equipment. The Zephyrian next to her polished his plasma rifle with 4 arms, each movement precise and calculated. A Krotak female checked her energy gauntlets, the blue glow reflecting off her scaled skin. Sereth stood empty-handed. "Look at a human," whispered Veltar, a tall Andromedian with silver skin that shimmered like liquid mercury. His voice carried the musical quality of his species, but the words dripped with mockery. Did she forget her equipment in her dormitory? Laughter rippled through the group of alien cadets. Sarah had heard it all before during her 6 months at the Galactic Military Academy. Humans were the newest species to join the Confederacy, barely 2 decades since first contact. Most aliens still saw them as primitive barbarians who had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. "Perhaps she plans to throw rocks," added Crix, insectoid Manthari whose compound eyes glittered with amusement. His mandibles clicked as he spoke. Very primitive. Very human. Instructor Thale, a massive draconian with obsidian scales and burning yellow eyes, approached their formation. His species had been warriors for millennia, and their military traditions formed the backbone of Confederate tactical doctrine. He stopped in front of Sarah, his reptilian features unreadable. "Cadet Chun." His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Where's your assigned weapon?" "I don't need one, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the renewed snickers from her classmates. Thale's eyes narrowed to slits. "This is advanced combat training, not a meditation session. You will face live targets using hostile environment combat protocols. Without proper equipment, you will fail. Respectfully, sir, I like to attempt the exercise as I am." The Draconian studied her for a long moment. In all his centuries of training warriors, he had never encountered such foolishness. Yet something in the human's calm demeanor gave him pause. He had read the classified reports from the Confederate Intelligence Division about human conflict history. Their species had survived ice ages, global wars, and countless natural disasters using nothing but primitive tools and stubborn determination. "Very well," he growled. "But when you are eliminated in the first minute, you will repeat this exercise every day until you learn proper respect for military protocol." The training ground transformed as holographic generators activated. The sterile academy courtyard vanished, replaced by a harsh alien landscape. Red sand stretched to the horizon under a pale green sky. Rocky outcroppings provided minimal cover, and the air shimmered with heat that made breathing difficult even with environmental suits. Mechanical drones emerged from concealed positions, their weapons systems online and targeting sensors sweeping the area. These are no simple training robots. Each one was equipped with non-lethal but painful neural disruptors that could drop a cadet in seconds. The exercise was designed to test tactical thinking, equipment utilization, and ability to work under pressure. "Cadets, you have 30 minutes to neutralize all hostile targets," Thale announced. "Begin." The alien cadets immediately spread out with military precision. Veltar's plasma rifle whined as it charged, and he took position behind a boulder. Crix activated his personal shield generator and began advancing in a flanking pattern. The Zephyrian extended his weapon's barrel and began scanning for targets through his scope. Sarah simply knelt in the sand. "The human has already given up," Veltar called out as he fired at a distant drone. His shot struck true, and the machine crashed in a shower of sparks. How embarrassing for their species. But Sarah wasn't giving up. She was listening. Her fingers touched the red sand beneath her, feeling its texture and composition. The granules were rough, with a high silica content, perfect for what she needed. The first drone spotted her crouch position and opened fire. Neural disruptor bolts sizzled through the air where she had been kneeling, but Sarah had already rolled aside. She came up running, her hands scooping sand as she moved. "What is she doing?" Crix chittered in confusion as he watched the human gather handfuls of dirt while dodging weapons fire. Sarah's movements seemed random to the alien observers, but every step was calculated. She had spent her childhood on Mars Colony 7, where sandstorms could strip flesh from bone and where survival meant understanding the environment as a weapon. Her hands worked automatically, compacting the sand with precise pressure and moisture from her breath. Another drone descended toward her position, its weapons charging. Sarah stood her ground until the last possible second, then hurled her handful of sand directly into its sensor array. The machine's targeting systems went haywire as abrasive particles clogged its delicate optics. It crashed blindly into a rock formation, exploding in a cascade of metal fragments. Impossible, Bride Veltor. She destroyed a combat drone with dirt. But Sarah was just getting started. She moved like a ghost across the landscape, using the terrain to her advantage in ways that baffled her classmates. When two drones cornered her in a narrow canyon, she didn't retreat. Instead, she gathered more sand and began rubbing it between her palms with rapid, circular motions. The aliens watched in amazement as smoke began to rise from her hands. Friction was generating heat, and the silica in the sand was beginning to glow. Sarah had created something that should have been impossible without modern technology. She had made fire. With a sharp breath, she blew the glowing sand particles into the air. They scattered like tiny stars, each one burning hot enough to damage electronics. The drone's sensors overloaded as the burning particles clouded their vision. Their thermal imaging went wild, unable to distinguish between the heat of their targets and the dozens of burning specks floating in the air. Both machines opened fire randomly, their shots going wide. Sarah used the confusion to close distance, diving between their positions and using momentum to topple one drone into the other. They crashed together in a tangle of twisted metal and sparking circuits. Across the training ground, the remaining alien cadets had stopped their own combat to stare. Veltar's plasma rifle hung forgotten in his hands. Crix's mandibles worked soundlessly. Even the Zephyrian's 4 arms had gone still. "How did she do that?" whispered one of the younger cadets, a small Pixari whose fur was standing on end with shock. Instructor Thale watched from his observation post, his expression unreadable. But behind his stoic facade, his mind was racing. He had seen countless species demonstrate their natural abilities. Zephyrians with their perfect coordination, draconian strength, and endurance. Manthari tactical precision. But never had he witnessed anything like this. The human had taken the most basic element of the environment and transformed it into a weapon using nothing but knowledge and determination. No technology, no special equipment, just understanding of physics and chemistry that seemed to be instinctive to her species. Sarah continued her assault on the remaining drones. She used the red sand to create friction traps, causing mechanical joints to seize and lock. She threw handfuls with deadly accuracy, clogging air intakes and causing engines to overheat. When one drone tried to escape by gaining altitude, she created a small whirlwind by spinning rapidly while releasing sand, creating a localized dust storm that brought it crashing down. With each destroyed target, the alien cadets grew more silent. The mockery had died completely, replaced by something approaching fear. They were witnessing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare and capability. 20 minutes into the exercise, Sarah stood alone in the center of the training ground. Around her lay the wreckage of 15 combat drones, each one neutralized without a single shot being fired. Her uniform was dusty and her face streaked with sweat, but she showed no signs of exhaustion. The holographic environment faded, returning them to the sterile academy courtyard. But the silence remained. Dozens of alien cadets stared at the human who had just redefined their understanding of what was possible. Instructor Thale approached slowly, his massive form casting a shadow over Sarah. When he spoke, his voice held a note of respect that hadn't been there before. "Cadet Chun," he rumbled, "report to my office after evening meal. We need to discuss your training curriculum." As Sarah nodded and walked toward the academy building, she could hear the whispered conversations starting behind her. The aliens were trying to process what they had witnessed. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but today had proven something important. Humanity might be the newest member of the Galactic Confederacy, but they were far from the weakest. 3 days had passed since Sarah's demonstration in the training grounds, and the academy buzzed with rumors. In the corridors, alien cadets whispered about the human who fought with sand. Some called it primitive magic. Others insisted it was some kind of hidden technology. None of them understood the truth. Sarah sat in the academy's vast library, surrounded by holographic displays showing tactical manuals from dozens of worlds. She wasn't studying weapons or combat formations. Instead, she researched the environmental conditions of planets throughout Confederate space. Desert worlds, ice planets, toxic atmospheres, volcanic landscapes. Each one presented opportunities that trained military minds couldn't see. Studying magic tricks? The voice dripped with barely controlled anger. Sarah looked up to see Zarketh standing over her table. The Vorthan was nearly 3 meters tall, with crimson skin and bone ridges that ran along his skull like a crown. His species were known throughout the galaxy as elite warriors, bred for combat across generations. He commanded respect and fear from every cadet in the academy, except from Sarah. "Just learning about different environments," she replied calmly, not rising from her seat. "You humiliated us," Zarketh growled, his 4 fingers clenching into fists. That display was not combat. It was a circus performance. The drones didn't seem to think so. The Vorthan's bone ridges flared with rage. His species had dominated military academies across the galaxy for centuries. They prided themselves on honor, tradition, and the sacred art of warfare. What Sarah had done violated everything he believed about proper combat. "Tomorrow is the advanced tactical exercise," he said, leaning forward until his breath fogged the holographic displays. "Real weapons, real ammunition. No more games with dirt." "Looking forward to it," Sarah said, returning her attention to her research. Zarketh straightened, his expression dangerous. "You will not embarrass us again, human. I will make certain of that." As he stalked away, other alien cadets who had been watching quickly averted their eyes. Word of the confrontation would spread within hours. Sarah sighed and closed the holographic displays. She had hoped to avoid making enemies, but some conflicts were inevitable. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Instructor Thale stood before the assembled cadets with an expression more serious than usual. Behind him, holographic displays showed star charts and military deployment patterns. "Cadets, your advanced exercise has been modified due to developing circumstances," his voice rumbled across the training hall. 3 hours ago, the Confederate monitoring station at Kepler 442b went silent. Intelligence suggests possible hostile activity. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Kepler 442b was a frontier world with minimal strategic value, but it sat along a major hyperspace route. Any threat there could spread quickly through Confederate space. "A reconnaissance team is being deployed immediately," Thale continued. "However, due to the nature of the terrain and potential unknown threats, this mission requires unconventional thinking. Cadet Chun, you will accompany the team as an observer and tactical consultant." The announcement hit the assembly like a physical blow. Sarah felt dozens of alien eyes turned toward her, most filled with disbelief. Zarketh's expression turned murderous. "Sir," the Vorthan stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "With respect, sending an untested human on an active mission violates every Academy protocol. She has no real combat experience." "The decision has been made," Thale replied flatly. "The mission launches in 2 hours." Dismissed. As the cadets filed out, Sarah found herself surrounded by a mix of curious and hostile faces. Some wanted to understand what made her special. Others clearly thought she was being set up for failure or worse. "You're going to get real soldiers killed," hissed Veltar as he passed. The Andromedians' silver skin had darkened with anger. "When you freeze up in actual combat, their blood will be on your hands." But not all reactions were negative. Crix approached hesitantly, his compound eyes showing what might have been respect in his species. "The sand technique," he clicked quietly. "How did you know it would work?" "I didn't," Sarah answered honestly. "I just understood what sand could do under the right conditions. And if you had been wrong, then I would have learned something and tried something else." The Manthari considered this for a moment, then nodded. Adaptability over preparation. Interesting philosophy for warfare. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the launch bay wearing Confederate military armor that felt strange after days in Academy uniforms. The reconnaissance team consisted of 5 seasoned soldiers from different species, each one looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. The team leader was Captain Oryx, a grizzled Draconian whose scales bore scars from dozens of campaigns. His yellow eyes studied Sarah with the calculation of a predator evaluating potential prey or partnership. "I've read your Academy file," he rumbled as their transport ship prepared for departure. "Impressive training scores, but zero combat experience. Why exactly are you here?" "To observe and provide tactical input if requested," Sarah replied. "And if things go badly, then I'll adapt to the situation." Captain Oryx snorted, but something in Sarah's calm confidence gave him pause. Like Instructor Thale, he had studied human military history. Their species had a disturbing tendency to find ways to win conflicts they should have lost. The journey to Kepler 442b took 6 hours through hyperspace. Sarah spent the time studying everything available about their destination. The planet was mostly desert, with vast silicon sand, dunes broken by crystalline formations, and underground water sources. The Confederate monitoring station was built into a natural canyon system that provided protection from the fierce windstorms that regularly swept the surface. "Atmospheric composition is breathable but thin," reported Sergeant Nix, the team's Pixari communications specialist. "Temperature ranges from 50 degrees Celsius during the day to -30 at night." "Any signs of what happened to the station crew?" asked Corporal Jex, a heavily muscled Zephyrian. "Negative. All communication arrays appear functional, but there's been no response to any hails." As their ship dropped out of hyperspace and approached the planet, Sarah studied the terrain through the viewports. The red sand reminded her of the Academy training ground, but this was different. The granules were finer, almost powder-like. The crystal formations contained trace metals that would make them excellent conductors under the right conditions. "Landing in 10 minutes, announced their pilot. "Be advised, long-range sensors are detecting some kind of energy signature near the monitoring station. Could be equipment malfunction or hostile activity." Captain Oryx turned to his team. "Standard reconnaissance protocol. We go in quiet, gather intelligence, and extract. No heroics. If we encounter hostiles, we withdraw and call for reinforcements." "And if withdrawal isn't possible?" asked Corporal Jex. The captain's scarred face was grim. "Then we adapt and survive until extraction arrives." Their transport set down in a rocky area several kilometers from the monitoring station. The moment the airlock opened, Sarah felt the alien environment assault her senses. The air was thin and dry, carrying the scent of ozone and distant lightning. Wind howled across the landscape, creating patterns in the sand that shifted like living things. "Thermal imaging shows the station is powered, but empty," reported Sergeant Nix as they moved across the terrain. Whatever happened here, it happened fast. As they crested a ridge overlooking the monitoring station, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. The facility appeared intact from a distance, but closer inspection revealed the truth. The main entrance was sealed with some kind of crystalline growth, like massive gemstones had erupted from the ground to block all exits. "Those crystals," she whispered. "They're not natural." Captain Oryx raised his weapon, scanning the surrounding area. "How can you tell?" "The formation pattern. Natural crystals grow in predictable geometric shapes based on molecular structure. These are deliberately placed to create a barrier. Before anyone could respond, the sand beneath their feet began to vibrate. From the dunes surrounding the station, shapes emerged that defied explanation. They looked like living crystal formations, each one the size of a small building. Faceted surfaces reflected the pale sunlight as they moved with impossible grace across the desert. Silicon-based life forms, breathed Sergeant Nix. I've never seen anything like them. And they're heading straight for us, added Corporal Jex, his 4 arms already reaching for additional weapons. The creatures moved without sound, gliding across the sand like ships on a crystalline sea. As they approached, Sarah could see that their surfaces weren't solid crystal, but thousands of tiny facets that moved independently, creating patterns of light and color. "They're beautiful," she murmured. "They're also surrounding us," Captain Orcs growled. "All units, prepare for defensive action." But Sarah stepped forward, her hands empty and raised peacefully. "Wait, they haven't attacked yet. Maybe they're not hostile." "The missing station crew suggests otherwise," the captain replied, but he held his fire. The largest crystal creature approached until it towered over the reconnaissance team. Up close, Sarah could see that its faceted surface created complex patterns of reflection and refraction. Light seemed to flow through its body like liquid, creating a hypnotic display. Then it spoke, not with sound but with light itself. Patterns of illumination flowed across its surface in what was clearly a structured communication attempt. "It's trying to talk to us," Sarah breathed. "Can you understand it?" asked Captain Oryx. Sarah studied the light patterns, her mind racing. She had seen similar phenomena before, in the aurora displays on Mars Colony 7. Natural light shows created by charged particles interacting with atmospheric gases. But this was different, controlled, intentional. "I think so," she said slowly. "Give me a moment." She knelt in the sand and began drawing symbols with her finger. Simple geometric shapes that might be universally understood. Circle, triangle, square. The crystal creature watched, its light patterns shifting and flowing. Then, it responded by creating the same shapes in light across its surface. Circle, triangle, square. "First contact protocol established," Sarah announced. "It's trying to communicate." But before she could continue, energy weapons fire erupted from behind them. The reconnaissance team spun around to see Confederate ships approaching fast, their guns already charging. "This is Admiral Korath of the 3rd Fleet." A voice crackled over their communicators. "All personnel withdraw immediately. We are engaging hostile forces." "No," Sarah shouted into her communicator. "They're not hostile. They're trying to communicate." But it was too late. The crystal creatures reacted to the incoming weapons fire with speed that defied their massive size. Light patterns across their surfaces shifted from peaceful communication attempts to something that looked distinctly like anger. The sand beneath the reconnaissance team began to move. The sand moved like a living ocean beneath their feet, rising in waves that threatened to swallow the entire reconnaissance team. Crystal creatures that had been attempting peaceful communication now pulsed with angry red light as Confederate warships descended from orbit with weapons blazing. "Fall back to extraction point," Captain Oryx shouted over the chaos, but his words were lost in the roar of displaced sand and energy weapon discharge. Sarah watched in horror as the first crystal creature took a direct hit from a Confederate plasma cannon. The blast shattered its surface into thousands of glittering fragments, each piece screaming with light before going dark forever. The remaining creatures responded with fury that shook the planet. The sand beneath the Confederate ships began to crystallize, forming spears of silicon that shot upward like missiles. Ships that had dominated space for centuries found themselves struggling against an enemy that fought with the very ground they stood on. "We need to get out of here," Corporal Jex shouted, his 4 arms working frantically to maintain balance as the sand shifted beneath them. But Sarah was moving in the opposite direction, toward the largest crystal creature that still pulsed with patterns of communication mixed with rage. Her teammates thought she had lost her mind. "Chun," Captain Oryx roared. "What are you doing?" Sarah didn't answer. She was focused entirely on the light patterns flowing across the creature's surface. In the chaos of battle, she could see something that the others missed. The patterns weren't random expressions of anger. They were structured, deliberate. The creatures were trying to tell them something. She dropped to her knees in the shifting sand and began working with desperate speed. Her hands moved in patterns that seemed chaotic to observers, but followed a precise internal logic. She was creating something that no one expected. A mirror. Using the fine silicon sand and her own body heat, she began forming a reflective surface. The technique required perfect understanding of crystalline structure and thermodynamics, but Sarah had spent her childhood on a world where such knowledge meant survival. Grain by grain, she convinced the silicon to align into a pattern that would reflect light with perfect clarity. The crystal creature noticed her work and paused in its defensive actions. Light patterns shifted across its surface, moving from angry red to curious blue. It was trying to understand what the small human was doing in the middle of a war zone. Sarah completed her makeshift mirror and angled it to catch the creature's light. Then, she began reflecting the patterns back, adding her own modifications. Simple shapes became complex mathematical equations. Basic geometric forms evolved into star charts and planetary diagrams. She was showing them the galaxy from a human perspective. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creature's light patterns shifted to brilliant white, and somehow Sarah understood that this was their expression of amazement. The pattern she had reflected back included something the creatures had never seen before. Maps of hyperspace routes, the locations of Confederate worlds, proof that life existed throughout the galaxy, not just on their isolated desert planet. The crystal creature rose to its full height and projected a pattern of light that could be seen from orbit. Every other creature on the planet stopped fighting and began displaying the same pattern. It was a call for communication, transmitted in a way that even the Confederate fleet could understand. All ships cease fire immediately. Admiral Korath's voice crackled through their communicators. Unknown entities are attempting communication. The battlefield fell silent, except for the whisper of wind across sand. Confederate ships hung in the atmosphere, weapons powered down, but ready. Crystal creatures stood motionless, their surfaces displaying complex patterns that painted the desert in rainbow light. Sarah stood slowly, her mirror clutched in her hands. She had just prevented what could have been the first interstellar war between the Confederacy and a completely unknown form of life. "Chun," Captain Oryx approached cautiously. "What exactly did you just do?" "I showed them that we're not alone in the universe," she replied. "And they showed me why they captured the monitoring station crew." Before anyone could ask what she meant, the sand beneath the monitoring station began to shift. The crystalline barriers that had sealed the entrance dissolved, revealing the facility's interior. More importantly, they revealed the station crew. They were alive. All 12 members of the monitoring team emerged from the facility, looking confused but unharmed. The crystal creatures hadn't captured them as prisoners. They had been protecting them from something else. The station's emergency protocols activated 3 days ago, reported Chief Engineer Vax Ti, an elderly Pixari whose fur was still standing on end from the experience. Some kind of massive solar storm was approaching. Radiation levels that would have been lethal to organic life. Sarah looked up at the crystal creatures with new understanding. They saved you. Their bodies can absorb and redirect energy, including harmful radiation. They turned the monitoring station into a shelter. "But why didn't they respond to our communication attempts?" asked Sergeant Nix. The largest crystal creature pulsed with a pattern that Sarah was beginning to understand meant explanation or teaching. Its light painted images in the air that told a story of isolation and loneliness. For thousands of years, these beings had lived alone on their desert world, believing they were the only intelligent life in the universe. When Confederate signals reached their planet, they thought it was a natural phenomenon. It wasn't until the monitoring station was established that they realized the transmissions came from other living beings. They'd spent days trying to find a way to communicate, not understanding the technology or protocols involved. The solar storm had provided an opportunity to help the strange organic visitors, but their actions had been misinterpreted as hostility. The arrival of a Confederate fleet had seemed to confirm their worst fears about these new life forms. Sarah stepped forward, still holding her improvised mirror. Through reflected light patterns, she began explaining human concepts of diplomacy and peaceful contact. She showed them images of different species working together in the Confederacy, of worlds where various forms of life coexisted in harmony. The response was overwhelming. Light patterns erupted across the surface of every crystal creature as they shared the revelation with others of their kind. The desert became a canvas of communication that stretched to the horizon. Admiral Korth's ship landed nearby, and the admiral himself approached with a diplomatic team. He was a seasoned Draconian who had overseen first contact with dozens of species, but nothing had prepared him for this situation. Cadet Chun, he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded entire fleets. I need a full report on what happened here. Sarah straightened to attention, suddenly aware that she was addressing one of the most powerful military leaders in Confederate space. Sir, the entities are a silicon-based life form with highly advanced energy manipulation capabilities. They attempted to protect our monitoring station crew from harmful radiation and are eager to establish formal diplomatic relations. And you determine this how? Through light-based communication using reflected patterns, sir. They're highly intelligent and have been isolated for millennia. They're excited to learn about the larger galaxy. Admiral Korth studied the crystal creatures, which were still displaying complex patterns of light that painted the desert in brilliant colors. Can you teach our linguists and diplomats how to communicate with them? Yes, sir. But they learn quickly. Given time, I believe they could adapt to our standard communication protocols. Outstanding. You've potentially prevented an interstellar incident and established contact with an entirely new form of life. The Admiral's scarred face showed what might have been approval. That's impressive work for someone with no formal diplomatic training. Over the following hours, Sarah worked with Confederate diplomats to establish basic communication protocols with the crystal beings. She learned that they called themselves the Resonant Chorus and had developed a civilization based on harmonized energy patterns rather than traditional technology. They offered to share their knowledge of energy manipulation and radiation protection in exchange for information about the galaxy beyond their world. It was the beginning of what would become one of the most beneficial partnerships in Confederate history. As the diplomatic teams worked to establish formal relations, Sarah found herself approached by Captain Oryx. The grizzled Draconian warrior studied her with eyes that had seen countless battles. I've been fighting for 30 years, he said quietly. I've seen soldiers with every kind of weapon and training imaginable. But I've never seen anything like what you did today. I just listened and tried to understand, Sarah replied. No, you did something more than that. The captain's voice carried a note of respect that hadn't been there before. You looked at a situation everyone else saw as a threat and found the potential for something better. That's not a skill they teach at any academy. News of the successful first contact spread quickly through Confederate space. When Sarah returned to the academy 3 days later, the atmosphere had changed completely. Alien cadets who had mocked her empty hands now watched her with curiosity and respect. Zarketh was waiting for her in the academy courtyard. The massive Vorthan's bone ridges were no longer flared with anger, but his expression remained serious. You have brought honor to the academy, he said formally. Your actions have been studied by tactical instructors across the Confederacy. I was wrong to question your methods. We all bring different strengths, Sarah replied diplomatically. Your tactical knowledge and combat skills are just as important as anything I did. The Vorthan considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps. But you have shown us that warfare is not always the answer to every problem. That is a lesson worth learning. As weeks passed, Sarah's success on Kepler 442b became the subject of study throughout Confederate military academies. Her technique of environmental adaptation and unconventional problem-solving was incorporated into training programs across dozens of worlds. The crystal beings, now known as the Resonant Chorus, became valuable allies of the Confederacy. Their energy manipulation abilities proved useful in countless applications, from power generation to defensive systems. In return, they gained access to the vast library of galactic knowledge and the opportunity to explore worlds beyond their desert home. Sarah completed her academy training with honors and was assigned to the newly formed Diplomatic Contact Division. Her first mission would take her to the edge of Confederate space, where long-range sensors had detected signs of another previously unknown civilization. On her final day at the academy, she stood once again in the training grounds where everything had begun. Her hands were still empty, carrying no weapons or advanced equipment. But now she understood that her greatest tools weren't things she could hold. They were the ability to see possibilities where others saw only problems, to find common ground where others saw only differences, and to build bridges where others would build walls. Instructor Thale approached for a final evaluation. The massive Draconian's expression was thoughtful as he studied his most unusual graduate. "Cadet Chun," he rumbled, "your methods remain unconventional. Your tactical approaches often violate established doctrine. Your preference for improvised solutions over standard equipment continues to baffle our instructors." Sarah waited for the inevitable criticism that would temper her success. However, Thale continued, "You have demonstrated something that cannot be taught through traditional training. You understand that the greatest victories are achieved not by defeating enemies, but by discovering that they were never enemies at all." He handed her the insignia of a Confederate Diplomatic Contact Specialist, a rank that had been created specifically to acknowledge her unique contributions. "The galaxy is vast, Cadet Chun. There are countless worlds where beings live in isolation, believing they are alone in the universe. There are civilizations that have never known peace with their neighbors. There are conflicts that have raged for millennia because no one has found the right way to build understanding." Sarah accepted the insignia, feeling its weight as both honor and responsibility. "Your hands may be empty of weapons," Thale concluded, "but they carry the power to change the galaxy. Use that power wisely." As she walked away from the academy for the last time, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived as an unknown human from a primitive world, mocked by aliens who saw her species as barely worthy of consideration. She was leaving as something entirely new, a bridge between worlds, a translator of not just languages but of hopes, fears, and dreams across species, a guardian of peace who fought battles with understanding instead of weapons. Her hands remained empty, but they were ready to build a better galaxy for everyone who called it home.